I'm 39, a single dad, and for the past year, I've been at war with my ex-wife and her new husband over something I never thought I'd have to fight about. Our daughter, who's 16. Let me give you some backstory so you'll understand how this all exploded. My ex-wife and I divorced when our daughter was 10. It wasn't an amicable split, and honestly, I should have seen the red flags long before the marriage fell apart. She was always the type to expect the world to cater to her. Entitlement doesn't even begin to describe her attitude. After the divorce, I worked hard to provide a stable home for my daughter. She split time between me and her mom, and for a while, things were manageable. But 2 years ago, my ex married her current husband. He's a real piece of work, arrogant, controlling, and somehow even more entitled than she is. Things started to shift when my daughter would come back from their house exhausted. She complained about how she had to clean up after her stepdad's kids, 2 boys, ages 9 and 12, and take care of chores around the house. At first, I tried to brush it off. I figured maybe they were just trying to instill some responsibility in her. But it quickly became clear this wasn't about teaching her life skills. They were treating her like a maid. One day, she came home and told me she'd spent the entire weekend cleaning their house top to bottom because her mom and stepdad had decided to take a break and spend the weekend out of town. She was left alone with the boys, expected to cook, clean, and watch over them. When she told her mom she was overwhelmed, my ex snapped back, "This is your family now. You need to step up." I was livid. I confronted my ex, but she dismissed me, saying I was overreacting and that it was good for our daughter to learn how to contribute. Things came to a boiling point 3 weeks ago. My daughter came home and announced she wasn't going back to her mom's house. She was done. When I asked her what happened, she broke down crying and told me that her mom and stepdad had sat her down and informed her she'd be doing even more housework now because her mom was pregnant. They expected her to cook, clean, babysit the boys, and help out once the baby arrived. She said I was selfish for not wanting to help. My daughter sobbed. She told me I was lazy, and when I said I didn't want to do it, she threatened to cut off my phone and stop paying for my school stuff. That was the last straw. I promised my daughter she wouldn't have to go back, and I meant it. The fallout from that decision was immediate. My ex showed up at my house the next day, demanding to talk. I refused to let her in, so we argued on the front porch. "She's a teenager," my ex shouted. "It's not unreasonable to ask her to pitch in. You're making her spoiled, letting her think she doesn't have to do anything." Pitching in is one thing, I shot back. Turning her into your live-in maid is another. She's not your nanny, and she's not your housekeeper. If you can't handle your own household, maybe you shouldn't be having another kid. That hit a nerve. Her face turned red, and she started yelling about how I was poisoning our daughter against her. She accused me of being vindictive and jealous because she'd moved on and I hadn't. "I'm protecting my daughter," I said firmly. "And if you can't see why what you're doing is wrong, that's on you." She stormed off, but the fight was far from over. The next day, I got a letter from her lawyer. She was demanding I return our daughter to her custody and threatening to take me to court for violating the custody agreement. I immediately contacted my own lawyer. We filed for an emergency custody modification, citing emotional neglect and unreasonable expectations being placed on our daughter. I also had my daughter write a detailed statement about everything she'd been subjected to at her mom's house. When my ex got wind of this, she started playing dirty. She and her husband went on social media, posting vague but clearly targeted comments about deadbeat dads and teens being manipulated by bitter exes. She even sent emails to our daughter, guilt-tripping her and saying things like, "You're tearing this family apart, and do you really want to hurt your mom like this?" But my daughter stood her ground. She told me she was tired of being treated like a servant and wasn't going back, no matter what her mom said. The court date came faster than I expected. My ex showed up with her husband, both of them dressed like they were auditioning for a reality show. Her lawyer argued that I was alienating our daughter from her and that I'd been meddling in their parenting decisions. But when it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I submitted my daughter's statement, along with text messages, emails, and even screenshots of her mom's social media posts where she admitted expecting my daughter to step up and take on more responsibilities. The judge didn't look impressed by their arguments. At one point, when my ex's lawyer tried to claim that having our daughter clean and babysit was normal, The judge interrupted him. There's a difference between teaching a child responsibility and exploiting them for unpaid labor, the judge said sharply. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. My daughter's custody was officially transferred to me, and my ex was ordered to attend parenting classes. She was also warned that any further attempts to coerce or manipulate our daughter could result in restricted visitation. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure my ex and her husband faced real consequences for what they'd put our daughter through. I reported her husband to his employer. He's a manager at a mid-sized company, for unethical behavior. I'd found out he'd been bragging about making the rules at work and treating his employees the same way he treated my daughter, piling extra work on them and threatening their jobs if they didn't comply. It wasn't long before he was under investigation, and last I heard, he's been demoted. As for my ex, I made sure everyone in her social circle knew the truth. I didn't go on a smear campaign, but I didn't hold back when mutual friends and family asked why our daughter wasn't living with her anymore. The whispers started, and her perfect image began to crack. The final blow came a few weeks ago when my ex called, begging me to let bygones be bygones. She claimed she was willing to compromise and suggested we go back to the original custody arrangement. Absolutely not, I told her. You burned that bridge. Our daughter deserves better, and I'm going to make sure she gets it. She started crying, saying she missed her daughter and didn't want the baby to grow up without knowing their sister. I felt a pang of sympathy, but I didn't let it sway me. You should have thought about that before you treated her like hired help, I said. Since then, things have been quiet. My daughter is thriving now that she's in a stable, supportive environment. She's focused on school, has started volunteering at an animal shelter, and told me she finally feels like she can breathe again. If there's one thing I've learned from this whole ordeal, it's that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's worth it. My daughter deserves someone in her corner, and I'm proud I could be that for her. Want more stories like this? Subscribe. I promise they'll keep you on the edge of your seat.